All right, hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Ben, also known as Onk, and today I have with me Nathus. Sam, how are you doing?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so we're continuing our series on review for Battle for Whitefang Pass. We've already gone through all four of the factions for all the cards within the set, but now we're just going to do a little smaller episode to talk about the Forgeborn abilities that were introduced in Battle for Whitefang Pass, as well as the new Forgeborn. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go over each ability, and I've created little mock-ups to show each ability and how it breaks down across each cycle that the ability shows up at, and then we can just have a just like sort of an impromptu conversation and talk about what we like, what experiences we've had with them, and go from there. So let's talk about Crux Cobalt. So he is our new Forgeborn, the Metamind. And the first ability we'll talk about is Synaptic Siphon. So at cycle 2, Synaptic Siphon reads give a creature -4 attack, give a creature +4 attack. At cycle 3, that goes to give a creature -7 attack and then a creature +7 attack. And at cycle 4, you get a creature with -10 attack and another creature +10 attack. So if you remember from set 1, there was a card called Heavy Artillery. This is basically just Heavy Artillery on a Forgeborn ability. So what are your thoughts on this one, Sam?
Yeah, so I know when I first saw Crux out of the abilities, and I will be talking about the other abilities soon, like, I felt like off the bat, I thought this was one of the weaker abilities, just because the other ones could kind of do some crazy stuff. But when I've actually played against Crux, I feel like this has done a lot more damage against me than I always expect. Because I'm looking at the other abilities, I'm saying, oh no, there's going to be a lot of really great value there. And then it's just like, my opponent will play, like, maybe a level 2 or level 3 Synaptic Siphon, and it's just like, wow, that combat math I've been working for just completely got destroyed. Or I just look at their board and I'm like, they're like, it's just, oh, that Thunderstar that they have on the other side of the board just now became huge. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's one of those things where it's just you have all the utility of Heavy Artillery without having to use a spell slot for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot stronger than I gave it credit for, but it still is one of the weaker abilities of Crux Cobalt. But I'm never upset to see it on the card.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think one of the nice things about this particular ability is that you can get a 2-for-1 out of it.
Yeah.
You can save one of your creatures by debuffing the opposing creature, as well as increasing the attack of one of your creatures enough to kill one of their creatures. So there's a lot of flexibility there, especially if you line things up correctly. It's a little bit telegraphed, but it's especially potent when you're off Forge and they can't react to it anymore.
I agree.
So unlike some of the other abilities on other Forgeborn that just give either, give a creature plus stats or one creature minus stats, this one, like if you take, for example, Ironbeard that has several abilities that will just reduce a creature's attack. The disadvantage to that is that it really, you can only affect one creature with it, right? But with this, you get the potential of actually impacting the board on 2 lanes and not just one. So um, it's deceivingly more powerful, but again, it's probably one of Crux's weaker abilities, as we'll see as we go through the different ones.
The
Uh,
one thing I will say is I completely agree that this is an off Forge ability. Like your last play right before everything goes into battle, just because it's like one of those things where if you do it on Forge or you do it when when your opponent still has the ability to react, it's just they could get priority to really not take that 10 damage that you have for like the level 4. It's just
exactly. Yeah, and
you
it's
get so much more value by doing it second, like your very last action.
yeah. The only caveat I'd say to that is if you have like battle or strike abilities,
Oh, true. Yeah, you're right.
that there are going to be situations where you want to pop it early to create a favorable battle. But most of the times it's going to affect combat directly, so you just want to time it correctly. It's not necessarily like like a lot of Forgeborn abilities. You'll find you want to like pop them as soon as you possibly can, and this is more of one of those ones you have to kind of wait for the right time to do it. So,
Yeah, I agree.
um, so speaking of abilities you want to pop as soon as you can, why don't we talk about Shattered Psyche? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, Shattered Psyche at level 2 destroys a creature with attack 5 or less. At level 3, it destroys a creature with attack 8 or less. And at level 4, Shattered Psyche destroys a creature with 12 or less attack. So it's basically, like, it's one of my favorite abilities on Crux Cobalt. Like, removal and Alloyan is really hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
It's just getting that, like, kind of suppressing ability is so strong. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of like Death Touch for Cersei. It can only affect small attack creatures, but it's not level gated, which is nice. So it's a lot harder to dodge, especially when your opponent's playing with utility creatures.
Hmm.
So it can take out Blight Witch, Dark Art Sorcerer, that kind of stuff really easily, and they can rarely get out of range when it's relevant. So it's very easy to take something out or discourage them from playing that card. So
Yeah.
it's a good just way to control the board. Again, it's effectively a one for one. It's a one shot. You're just gonna take out, unlike where there's the potential with or the previous ability we looked at to have a two for one aspect. This is never really going to be more than just a one for one. But if you take out a high priority target, you can reduce advantage that they would have gained from that target. So in
Yeah.
that respect, it is pretty strong. Especially, most of the high utility creatures have low attack stats to begin with.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it kills the Blight Witch on curve, it kills the Glow Hive Siren on curve, it kills Dark Heart on curve.
Mhm.
It's just it gets rid of all the threats that you have a really hard time dealing with otherwise. So it's one of those abilities that if I have like a Forge Seal or Mantis, like I'm very happy to have a Shattered Psyche on the
Yeah,
cards.
for sure. All right, so let's get into his Crux's spicier abilities. So let's talk about precognition. So, precognition at cycle 2 reads the enemy player may play a gizmo minion, then you may play a card for free. Any card for free. At cycle 3, the enemy player may play a level 1 card for free. You can still play any card for free. And it's the exact same text at cycle 4. It's just they get to play a level 1 card for free, and you get to play a card for free. So there's a quote unquote symmetry to this ability, but given that you control the timing, you have a lot of power with this ability. It's like a souped up version of Sunder's Stimbolt, where Sunder you can only play a spell with it. This you can play anything, and I know it's been used to really good effect. If you have cards that can react to the card your opponent plays, so it's kind of like a Taliesin effect or a Reveler effect where you get your opponent gets to do something first and then you get to react to it. So a fun thing can be is you pop out, give them a gizmo, and then you immediately kill it with like some other creature like a lasher, and you got the lasher body there, and they've got no benefit out of it. So it's like a free lasher or something like that. But what are your thoughts on this one, Sam?
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite abilities for Crux. I know I've said that already with both abilities, but like precognition is one of the hardest ones to play against because it's like you know how much value your opponent's going to get. I still always argue with myself which level is the strongest because like level 3 and 4 giving your opponent a level 1 card when ideally they don't really have many left in their deck is like really strong because they might not even have anything they could play. Where at level 2 obviously getting somebody a gizmo could get them some more value than potentially a level 1 creature if they could immediately replace it. So this is a card that depending on what level, I almost like to play the level 2 when my opponent can't do anything else. So if I'm off Forge a little bit, I kind of like to be able to just know I'm going to be able to kill that gizmo. And
Mm-hmm.
then that level 3, I almost want to do it a little bit more on Forge. Like I just kind of want to force them into playing their like level 1 card that's probably not going to get them as much value at this point in the game. But it's one of those abilities that anything that says free is for me.
Yeah, I
And
love free.
the,
Yes.
yeah, and it's like honestly, I don't play with Crux enough, and it's like every time I see the abilities, I'm like, these are incredible,
Yeah.
and it's just precognition is one of the abilities that really excited me, like for Crux as a Forgeborn.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique ability amongst the Forgeborn. I mean, I guess there is like the sort of the parallel with Sunder's Stimbolt, but this sort of has that interplay between like what is your opponent going to do and can you react to that thing, and is their level 1 play or the gizmo actually relevant. Oftentimes
Yep.
you can set it up so it really isn't, especially if you've been
Exactly.
paying attention to what they've been playing throughout the game. You might know kind of what level 1 cards they have left, and you can probably deduce that by that point in cycle 3 they're just not going to be very meaningful even if they do have them in hand. Especially if you wait till the third turn of the cycle, you can see what's in their discard and what the likelihood is that they have a level 1 that can actually do something against you. Uh,
Exactly.
so it's a very like mind. It's like a crunchy like car like ability where you can think out a lot of different play lines with it. But it's the kind of ability that I like. Because I'm a big fan of Taliesin,
Yep.
and that sort of mind game and being able to play it in a deck where you have a lot of interaction, so that you can both answer what they're doing and get ahead at the same time. that's
Yep.
when these type of abilities really shine. Um,
Yeah,
so
I agree. And then also the big thing about level 2 is that your opponent can't actually upgrade a card by playing the card for free, or because it's like
exactly.
they get a gizmo. So it's like that's pretty big where you get to upgrade that extra card when your opponent really can't push forward. Where it's like at the level 3 precognition, like technically if you get to cycle 4, by them upgrading that level 1 card to a level 2, that could potentially bite you a little bit.
Hmm.
But once you get to level 4, it's like that level 1 card, that
Irrelevant.
really
Yeah.
shouldn't be irrelevant.
Yeah.
It might just be like a blocker or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I like precognition. I think if you're, ideal cruxes will have this at one of the three levels.
I agree.
Um, you know, I think this and the next ability we're talking about are probably the two most unique abilities for Crux. So, whether you get the Shattered Psyche or the what's it called, Synaptic Siphon, as your sort of third one, I think this one and Mind Over Matter, which we're about to talk about, is the one that you want. So let's talk about it. Mind Over Matter. So,
Yeah.
Sam, what we got here?
So Mind Over Matter at level 2 is draw 2 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on the top of your deck. Give creature you play 4 armor this turn. At level 3, Mind Over Matter has you draw 3 cards. You put those 3 cards back from your hand on top of the deck, and you get next creature gets 8 armor this turn. And finally, at level 4, Mind Over Matter has you draw 4 cards. You put 4 cards from your hand on top, and then you give the next creature you play 12 armor this turn. So this is the first ability that Stoneblade ever put out for SolForge that actually lets you draw cards.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be pretty incredible when you're trying to specifically play around 1 or 2 specific cards. Because at the end of a cycle, like, you have 5 cards that you never draw. So then when you can either draw 2, 3, or 4 cards and basically dig to that card you're missing. So let's say you have that level 3 Krogius and you don't draw it during the first 3 turns. On turn 3 of cycle 3, Mind Over Matter, the odds of finding that Krogius are very high when you look at 3 of the 5 cards that you didn't play. So it's like you can kind of dig for whatever you missed. And in addition to that, not only does it give you that draw value, but then you also get armor to the next creature you play. So
Yeah.
it's just, you get so much value. There's like no downside at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main use cases is trying to, on the third turn of the cycle, trying to dig to something that you missed. But I think one of the overlooked use cases of this ability is being able to craft your next turn's hand from turn
Yeah.
one or two. I mean, how many games have you had where you've drawn 3 cards you really want to play, but you only have 2 actions, right? This allows you to take that third card and put it on top and save it for the next turn. So, or you draw something like a Stitcher while you don't have a minion out. Well, why don't I just draw 2, tuck it, and then I have it next turn to get the full value out of it. So that's sort of the other major use case of Mind Over Matter that I see, is that it's one of those abilities that lets you manipulate the future, right?
Yeah.
Then there aren't very many abilities in the game that lets you do that. You're kind of at the mercy of the 5 that you draw, right?
Yeah.
This one negates some of that of the 5 you draw, and it also helps you with your next 5 at every level. So if you're not specifically digging for a particular card, like if that's not your deck strategy, the ability to craft the 2 turns of play can be very, very powerful and should not be overlooked. A lot of times you do not want to pop, so you don't want to pop this ability without like a game plan in mind of either what you want to draw from it or what you want to tuck from it, right? What you want to be putting back for the next turn. Obviously that doesn't matter on turn 3 because that at turn 3 you're wanting to dig deeper to try and find a card you missed, but on turns 1 and 2 you're setting up your next hand for really powerful play. And the 4 armor is a nice little bonus. It's a bit restrictive in that it's the next creature you play, but it has some very fun applications with Forge Plate Yeti, where you can pop this, drop your Forge Plate Yeti, give it an extra 8 armor, and just nuke something, right? If it's your only armor creature. So that's also a fun little synergy with this ability that people sometimes get to pull off. And I've had it happen before. It's really fun, but it's obviously just sort of like a minor upside. But it does protect your newest creature too, right? But it's the draw cards that's really the powerhouse of this ability.
Yeah, and I will say with Aloyan kind of being a little bit like, I know a lot of people kind of shy away from it, especially in competitive play, in like whenever you're playing any decks specifically in that more competitive mindset. And Crux, as it's like a Forgeborn itself, is so strong. It's one of those things where you don't see it as much as you should, because it's one of those things where every time I see Crux, like even right now, I get very excited as a
Mm-hmm.
player, just being like, wow, these abilities are incredible. And then a lot of times it's just like the card quality in the deck that has the Crux might not be exactly what you would like, which is why I'm hoping some of these abilities make their way into the next set, because like first of all, I want to be playing them with some of the new cards, which we're
Yeah.
not obviously getting into today. But like overall though, Crux specifically with Forge Steel Mantis, being able to mind over matter multiple times, being able to Shattered Psyche multiple times, it's just there's so much value in the Forgeborn itself, and if you could find the right support cards, it's
Mm-hmm.
like you could really get that to shine. So this is one of those Forgeborn I actually like almost want to build around the Forgeborn more than the deck, but it's
Right.
just Crux is very cool, and I want to like it. This makes me want to play Crux more just talking about it right
Yeah, absolutely.
now.
I think I only have about 5 Crux decks altogether because I haven't gone super deep on Balfour Whitefang Pass in terms of collecting it. And the decks have been disappointing, so I haven't had a chance to use the abilities a lot. And I think that's just why you see some, because you see such a high occurrence of alpha decks and Kickstarter decks, that when you do see a loin, it's usually from set one, and that just sort of kills the pool of how many Crux Cobalts are going to be out in the wild. So
Yeah,
it just really decreases the odds. But when you get if you can get a really good, really well optimized Crux deck, I think it's a very important Forgeborn to consider as your lead. So,
I agree.
so let's talk about Ironbeard next. So let's talk about formation. So in Balefright, so we talked about Crux as the new Forgeborn, so all of his abilities are new. Within Whitefang Pass, we have all the Forgeborn from Alpha, and what they did was every Forgeborn got 2 new abilities that were not in Alpha, and they lost 2 abilities from Alpha. So you still only have 4 abilities to choose from in your sort of not choose from that will be generated in your particular Forgeborn. And we're going to talk about the new ones, and then we'll give a little talk about what they lost. So, for Ironbeard, formation reads: give a creature +3 attack, and creatures adjacent to it +2 attack. At cycle 3, it's 6 attack and 4 to the adjacent creatures, and at cycle 4, it is 12 attack and 8 to adjacent creatures. So you're getting anywhere from 7 to 28 attack added to the board, depending on which level you are, and if you can line up the formation of creatures as the ability suggests. Uh, I mean, this is a very good board manipulation ability, but when you're playing with it, you need to be very cognizant of where you're putting your creatures to maximize it. And that also translates to you have to be very cognizant of where you put your exalts as you're playing the game to make sure that you're in a good formation position to actually use this ability. At the end of the day, it doesn't give a ton of stats on across the board. Like it's kind of a go tall, go wide at the same time ability.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at something like, let's say, like Korok's Lightning Speed, which gives everything at cycle 1 +2 attack and aggressive, it's kind of on par. You're probably getting about the same amount of stats that you would from that minus the aggression or the aggressive ability, and you're limited to like what your formation is.
Mm-hmm.
But it has its applications. It's probably not my favorite. I mean, Ironbeard has always kind of suffered, I think,
Yeah.
from the perspective of the community. So I'm not going to say this is like the most amazing ability, but it's an interesting one. What are your thoughts on it, Sam?
So, kind of like I know you mentioned that Ironbeard has suffered a little bit. So, I've actually had a couple decks where I've run Ironbeard with formation at level 3 or 4. And a lot of times when people see you're playing Ironbeard, they don't actually look at your Ironbeard to see what your abilities are. And I would say there's more than like 2 or 3 games where I've won because I've had stuff on the board and then I've just been like, all right, formation. And they're like, oh, you have one of those Ironbeards. And it's just like, it'll just win the game because like people a lot of times will just discount Ironbeard overall.
Right.
So, it's like, I do understand, and I completely agree that like kind of having to have your creatures adjacent to each other can be rough, especially with a format where Ice Storm exists.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, though, I love the fact that Ironbeard in set 2 becomes a little bit more aggressive instead of being so defensive. So it's like
Yes.
I definitely am always happy to see formation on an Ironbeard, but I do agree that there are other abilities that just push more stats. But I feel like it's a step in the right direction for Ironbeard.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those abilities that tells your opponent you got to be careful about open lanes. right?
Yes,
You gotta
exactly.
be careful about not blocking me because I can, at at my discretion, push a lot of damage, or
Exactly.
up, trade up when I need to, right? So it has a lot of equalizing power or just damage push through potential.
Hmm.
Um,
And I will say I've seen the most success with this when I'm off Forge. Because this
yeah,
is even though you're pushing a lot of attack stats, you almost have to use it defensively when you're playing with Ironbeard.
yeah,
Um,
and even if you're doing it to pump creatures in the front row, you just want to activate it when they can't respond to it.
exactly.
Um, so all right, and let's see what else he got. He also got promote. Do you want to talk about promote?
Yeah, so at level 2, Promote gives a creature 4 armor, you may have it battle its opposing creature. At level 3, it give a creature 6 armor, and you may have it battle its opposing creature. And finally, at level 4, Promote gives a creature 8 armor, you may have it battle its opposing creature. So I feel like this is my favorite Ironbeard ability because you actually get to battle and fight and remove. Because a lot of times, Aloyan doesn't really have a lot of ways to remove creatures inherently. And the
Right.
fact that you can protect one of your creatures, give it armor, and then battle it is awesome. Now, the downside is it has to be your opposing creature. So it's a lot very much like formation based, just like formation. So it's like your placement is very important. But the fact that you could kind of use Ironbeard to push a little bit more damage, do some removal, potentially remove a creature you couldn't already, is really nice and adds a lot of utility to an Alolan deck.
Yeah. I feel like I understand the flavor of having it only be able to hit the opposing creature, but I feel like that was an unnecessary restriction for this ability personally.
Yeah.
You're already putting your creature into harm's way for at most a 1-for-1, or like taking out, like, so let's just, from a higher level, we think about something like Shattered Psyche or Death Touch. You're really only taking out one card, right? Promote, same idea. You're still at most going to take out one card with it.
That's true.
So the fact that it's sort of restricting it to being the creature that's across from it makes it much more easy to play around, in the sense that you can very, if I'm your opponent and I see promote on the other side of the board, well, I'm going to do my best to not put a creature in front of one of your creatures where its toughness, where its health is not greater than your creature's attack. Otherwise, I'm just admitting that it, or at least that its attack can't punch through the armor and take it out if they try and promote fight it. So it loses some of its tactical strength by having to be opposing creature. But like you said, it's very rare for a loin to have straight up kill abilities. So I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's not in flavor for a loin. Usually Ironbeard likes to set things to attack to 0 or push them to the back, that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting addition to his toolbox as well. Say for that.
Yeah. And I would say, even though I really like the way that Promote and Formation go, I still likely do not choose Ironbeard by choice as my Forgeborn.
Mm-hmm.
It's still one of those things where I'm like, okay, you know what? Between the two in this deck, I guess I could use Ironbeard. And it's more
Right.
of like a, okay. But still, it's like, it's nice to actually have some abilities to push damage and be a little bit more aggressive versus just kind of play very defensively, which
Yeah,
Ironbeard
for
won't
sure.
consent.
So yeah, so talking in terms of talking about which abilities he still has, he also has Intimidate still, which is just set a creature's attack to 0 across all 3 levels, and then he's also kept Shields Up, which gives all your creatures and yourself amount of armor based on the level. I think it's like 4, 6, 8, or 10. I can't remember what the third one is.
4, 6, 10.
Yeah, 4, 6, 10. So he still keeps those offensive abilities. What he ended up losing was, I think it's called Reinforce, which gives your creature increased attack and then temporary armor. And then, so I think like sort of Formation took that place of that. And
Yeah.
then Knockback, which lets you reduce a creature's attack and send it to the back row. And depending on what level it was, you could do up to 2 creatures. So Promote kind of took the place of that one. You know, Again, it's Ironbeard. Haven't been super impressed with his alpha ability, so I don't think he lost a lot. I think Shields Up was probably his strongest ability anyway, and Intimidate is just functional across all levels. Is always going to have something you can hit with it. So I think the ones he kept in this set are probably the best of the options. So, yeah. But let's talk about Steel Rosetta, because she got some interesting stuff. So let's talk about Nanotech Disruptor. So, with Steel Rosetta, Nanotech Disruptor at cycle 2 reads, when you place a creature this turn, deal 4 damage to a creature. Cycle 3, it does 6 damage whenever you replace a creature, and then at Cycle 4, it'll deal 9 damage whenever you replace a creature. So a couple things to note with this ability. One, you can only hit creatures with it, so that's something you have to keep in mind. Two, it's not optional. So if you replace something and they don't have anything on the other side of the board, you have to hit your own creature. That is something that is actually a problem in one of my decks, where I just can do a ton of replacements in one turn, and it's sort of like, oh, first world problems. They have nothing on the other side of the board, and you're replacing and killing, having to damage your own stuff. Oh, big deal. But you just have to be aware of that. It's a very potent ability, and it really shines when you have minion generation. If your deck is not built around generating multiple bodies in a turn, Disruptor is kind of a lackluster ability, in my opinion. It doesn't do a ton of damage at the level it's at. You really need to be able to hit, like, do 2 or 3 replacements in the turn that you activate it. So, and I think, I'll be honest, I think at Cycle 2, it's really not good. I really don't think you want it at Cycle 2. I think you need it at Cycle 3 or 4, because 4 damage just isn't enough at that point in the game, and you're not going to be your engine isn't going to be going strong enough by Cycle 2 to sort of get in those positions where you can do a bunch of replacements in a turn. So it kind of functions at, I don't want to say it's like a win more ability, but it's a sort of like a final blow ability where you're ramping up your board, you're going wide, you activate this to clear the way to actually, like, punch through lethal or punch through a big chunk of damage. It's not an ability that's very good at just trying to use it to... It's not a very good ability for behind. It can be an ability that could be sometimes a blank, especially if you're very far behind, or you're at parity, and you don't have the ability to profitably replace something. But in a minion heavy deck, and especially a gizmo heavy deck where you want to be replacing gizmos, this ability can really pop off. What has been your experience with Nanotech?
So I've never actually used Nanotech Disruptor myself, but I've played against it quite a few times, and specifically when people are playing it with Syntheta's Laboratory is when I feel like it's done the most damage against me. So even when I've played stuff like Forge Seal Mantis lists and things like that, it's just like they can deal so much damage and remove so many of my creatures that I need on the board with that Nanotech Disruptor. But I agree, the level 2 is just not enough. It's the same reason why I don't really like Cersei Life Drain level 2. It's just 4 damage, doesn't kill enough things. And like you said, you usually don't have your engine at level 2. But when you get to level 3 and 4, you're actually able to start killing creatures just with 1 replacement. So you can, like, have 3, 4, 5 replacements in a turn and then go crazy. And I know, like, playing against a Mad Lab deck, I forget who was playing it against me. It might have actually been you.
It might have been me, yeah.
Where it's like, I think there was like 7 or 8 Nanotech Disruptor triggers against me to kill my whole board and everything I played. And it was just like, Mad Winter was like the Nexus Core minion was getting killed, and then you were replacing the stuff in the laboratory or whoever. Like, it was insane. And, like, it was just one of those things where it, like, I like kind of had to take a deep breath after that turn. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like this before. And I'm like, thank goodness there was not enough commands around the field at the same time.
I do have that Mad Lab deck that has Syntheta's Lab, so that's really, if you see this ability, Syntheta's Lab is the best card probably that you can get to work with this. Because Syntheta's Lab, you replace the first card, and then you generate more bodies to replace. So you're not sort of losing ground as you're actually expanding your board with the replacements rather than just sort of staying even. And then you're also dealing damage, so you just get so much advantage that way. So it's an ability that needs a specific deck to really shine. And again, Cycle 2 version of it, I've not been impressed with. It's very hard to get enough of an engine going where you can do much with it. And this is kind of like a really bad life drain, right? You don't even get life out of it. You can maybe hit one thing in Cycle 2 with it. It's very rare that you can hit multiple things. So
yeah, and I feel like Cycle 3 is probably the sweet spot, because 4 is probably a little too late. Like, granted, at the end of the time, like, if you get to Cycle 4, there's a chance that that's just going to clear the board and win you the game. So it's like, that being said, though, I feel like Cycle 3 is the best time to push damage with this.
For sure. All right, so the other ability that Steel Rosetta got was Optimize. So, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So at level 2, Optimize has play a Gizmo minion, give the next creature you play this turn +2/+2. At level 3, it's play a Gizmo, give the next creature you play this turn +4/+4. And at level 4, it has play a Mega Gizmo minion, give the next creature you play this turn +6/+6. So when I see Optimize, I feel like it's almost like a downgraded Tinker, unfortunately, because you only get one Gizmo, and then you get basically the Gizmo buff immediately. So like there are going to be the situations where you replace the Gizmo with a creature and give it +4/+4 during cycle 2. That being said, that flexibility is kind of nice when you can do it that way. At level 3, getting a Gizmo and the next creature getting +4/+4 is very similar to having a Mega Gizmo if you replace that, but it is a little less resilient. So Optimize, when I look at it, I'm just like, a lot of times I'm like, I wish it was Tinker. That being said, there are going to be those fringe situations where it's just nice to not have to worry about having the Gizmo, and you don't technically have to replace with the next creature you play. So you could get a little extra value out of the card you play. So if they remove your board in between Optimize and the next card you play, like, okay, you know what? I still got my buff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this replaced Tinker. Tinker is not in Whitefang, so I think this is sort of the analog to Tinker. I actually think that depending on what your deck is trying to do, this can be more powerful than Tinker. So I think Tinker is stronger in decks where you strictly want to be going wide, and you want to have extra bodies to throw around. So it's really good with like a Necrium build, like, you know, things like having a Blight Witch to sacrifice the extra Gizmo to. You know, you can get the same Tinker effect if you are very similar. Like it functions very similar to Tinker if you're not replacing the first creature. So, okay, so let's just map this out. You play Tinker, you get 2 Gizmos. You play a creature, you replace the Gizmo, it gets +2/+2.
Yep.
You can do the exact same play pattern with Optimize without having to replace a Gizmo, assuming your creature that you're playing doesn't care about replacement.
Yeah.
Or if you're only planning to play one creature, that creature gets extra big. And you cannot do that with the Tinker ability, right? You can't get +4/+4. Optimize is almost, it's just, Tinker at level 3, it's just a Mega Gizmo. You can get the exact same benefit out of this if you immediately play the creature over it. So it's almost, I'd say Optimize is basically just Tinker level. I see no functional difference between the two, to be honest, unless you're trying to like spread out the bodies.
Yeah.
And at cycle 4, you don't always have 2 free lanes where you want to dump 2 different Mega Gizmos. So I think it's on par with Tinker. I don't think it's a downgrade. I think it just depends on what your deck is trying to do. And I'm a fan of it. I think it's fine. I like anything that gives you board presence. And sometimes you can play the Gizmo just as like a blocker to finish something off, and you get your big creature. Because you don't always want to be in a situation where you need to trade off the creature you play through Optimize or Tinker, but you also want to have another creature that's going to survive or push through damage. So it has a different kind of play pattern.
Yeah.
But I think it's on par. I don't think it's better or worse specifically than Tinker.
I agree with you. I feel like you changed my opinion as you were talking about that. I agree.
Yeah, that was exactly my goal. So what did Rosetta lose? So she lost Tinker and she lost Repurpose. So I think Nanotech kind of replaced Repurpose, as sort of like your replacement synergy ability. But she still kept Enhance, and she kept Inspire, which is Enhance is what lets you upgrade cards and play a Gizmo, and then Inspire lets you take on the Forgeborn ability. So I like that she kept Inspire. I hope she keeps Inspire, because I think that's one of the coolest abilities that she has, because that really makes deck building very interesting. But yeah, I like it.
Me too.
Let's move into Korok. So Korok first new ability is called Blast Wave. It says deal 3 damage to up to 2 creatures. Then at cycle 3, it's 5 damage, and at cycle 4, it's 9 damage. So you do that amount of damage to 2 creatures, whichever ones you choose. So it's like a mini sort of Firestorm-y kind of ability. Not quite a Firestorm, actually. Sunder's closer to that. We'll talk about that later. But it lets you hit 2 things, effectively. It's really good at finishing off things. It's good at taking out minions. It also has some interesting applications where it doesn't have to be your opponent's creatures, so you can hit your own Thundersword with it, or your own Shardback and trigger it, which I've done a number of times. I've had decks where I've used Blast Wave, hit one of their creatures, hit my Shardback, finish off that creature and a couple other creatures at the same time. So like pinging your own shard back or pinging your own thundersword with this ability can be very, very potent. But what if? But it's it's just a damage thing. It has a chance for a 2-for-1, or to hit take out two things at once. So I like it. What are your thoughts on it, Sam?
Yeah, so I feel like Blast Wave for me, like I feel like it's a little underwhelming for what I want from Korok because like
Mm-hmm.
looking at Flame Strike, which does from the original Korok, which has 5 damage, 8 damage, and 15 to one creature. I feel like the 3 damage up to 2. Granted, you're doing more damage with Blast Wave, but at the same time you have to spread it out. So it's like you might have that one big threat that you just can't deal with the level 2 Blast Wave.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that specifically because a lot of times I've used Korok that had Blast Wave at 2 or 3. The level 2, it just always felt underwhelming to me because I'm a lot of times not able to kill the cards I want to kill.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like level 3 is in a little bit better of a sweet spot because 5 damage can kill a lot of things better than 3 can. It's just kind of like that whole debate we had with the Steel Rosetta ability for the replacements.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that 5 damage is a better breakpoint in order to actually kill creatures. And just being able to say, hey, I'm going to kill 2 things on board, or you could hit your own Thundersword, like you said, is nice. At level 4, like 9 damage sometimes might not be enough for me either. I feel like it can finish off creatures, it could kind of deal damage around the board and kind of conditionally kill stuff, but it's just like, if your opponent drops like a big creature and it's just like, oof, Blast Wave's not enough for me to deal with it, and they only have one thing on board, now this like other 5 damage is basically going to go to waste. Like, there are situations where I don't like it as much,
Mm-hmm.
but it can be nice when you're playing aggressive and playing aggro, being able to kill stuff off the board and just like, ideally you're playing big creatures, they're blocking them, they only have a few damage left, and then you kill it with Blast Wave.
Yeah.
So it's like, I like the design of it, it's just I wish it was 4 damage, but that would probably be too much to deal 4 and 4.
Yeah, I think that might be a little too powerful. Yeah, so I feel like with this ability, it's good at taking out minions, and clearing the way for your threats or finishing off things that have taken damage previously. It's really good. So it's one of those abilities that your opponent has to really pay attention to because a lot of times, I mean, not necessarily at like the most competitive levels, but at least in sealed or like more casual, a lot of the combat math just ends up being, well, which my creature survives with a couple health and yours doesn't. And so this sort of like finishes it off, and it functions like Demolish in that it'll finish off a damaged creature, and then you might actually be able to weaken or take out another creature at the same time. Again, it's going to depend on the deck and the situation of what your deck's trying to do. I don't think it's a bad ability, but it's just not like the most exciting ability that he got.
Yeah.
But why don't we then, like you said, it's not like Flame Strike, and Flame Strike was one of the ones that he lost. I think this is sort of the analog to what Flame Strike was trying to do. It just sort of spreads the damage instead of doing it all at one target.
Yeah, makes sense.
Speaking of dealing damage to one target, why don't we talk about Earthen Fists?
Yeah, so at level 2, Earthen Fists is give a creature +4 attack, you may have it battle an enemy creature. At level 3, it's give +6 attack and battle an enemy creature. And then at level 4, give a creature +8 attack, you may have it battle an enemy creature. I feel like of the Korok abilities, this is probably one of my favorites. I find that this gets used against me a lot when people are playing Rumble Sparks and Nova Elementalists, and it also is something I use a lot with that deck specifically.
Yeah.
Also with Dino decks, Shard backs, anything that lets you battle and like you want your creatures taking damage, but it's just like the fact that you could put out any creature that tends to kill most things that you want to kill. It's an ability, like it's basically like a Stone Skin that's like a little bit muted, and it's an ability that like I want my Korok to have it, and I want to add cycle 2 usually. If I have it at cycle 3, I'm not upset, but at cycle 2, like a lot of times that could like be your aggro push to potentially like win the game cycle 2 turn 3. And
Yes.
it's probably my favorite Korok ability. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like Earthen Fists a lot. Like you said, it's Stone Skin on a Forgeborn. I think it's like scales like 1 or 2 less attack as you go through the levels, but it's in a set where Slay was a very big mechanic. Exactly. And the fact that you get to battle something, you get to increase the creature's attack, battle something, and potentially trigger a Slay ability that could be game breaking. I can't tell. I have a deck that I've paired with a level 2 Earthen Fist and Cackle Bones, and it's extremely devastating when you drop Cackle Bones and take out 2 creatures in one shot, and you still have a high toughness Cackle Bones. Because the play pattern is, what you do is you play Cackle Bones, you Earthen Fist like a minion or something that only does a couple damage to it, and then you take out their huge thing with the Slay ability. And that can be devastating. I played games where that's like all right, I guess the game's over now, and it's just cycle two because of how swingy the board, how much it swings the board, and and contrast this with promote from Ironbeard. It doesn't have to be opposing, right? You can hit anything on the board from anywhere, and that's very scary because you can direct it wherever you want. It's really good with Thundersoar. It's really good with Shardback. I think it's really strong. I think it's a very strong single target removal. That said, sometimes it functions like a Grave Pact where you have to sack your creature to take out their creature, right? You just don't have the toughness line up with the power. And in that regard, it can be tricky. So I like it in decks that have either a lot of fodder that I can just like throw a minion at something and do like a enhanced flame strike effect essentially, or have high toughness creatures that can survive and have like slay abilities like Cackle Bones. So
I would say though the threat of the ability is almost as strong as the ability itself as well, because it's one of those things where when I play against an Earthen Fist, I have to look at the board and be like, wow, my opponent has this big bulky creature. I can't just trump block it right now because they're going to be able to kill my creature across from it and push a ton of damage. Like, it's one of those things where it's just the threat of Earthen Fists makes you have to play defensively on the other side, and
yes.
it's just that alone adds so much power. It's one of those things where I actually try to not use it right away unless I really have to, because it makes my opponent have to play a little scared, knowing that, like, especially if I'm off Forge and I have that Earthen Fist, it's like their second play becomes really difficult.
Yeah.
And they really have to think about it, and it's just that alone adds so much value to me, and that's
sure.
why I really like that ability.
Yeah, it's great for pushing damage, and it's great for saving, like, to force your opponent to sort of play defensively around it. So, and it's good at all levels. Ideally, I agree. Cycle 2 is the best place to have it, because, especially if you're going for an aggressive game plan, because it really can tip the scales in your favor. The later the game goes, the harder chance you're going to aggro out somebody, and the big creatures start to drop, right? And your creatures may not be able to take out their big creatures and survive the fight, right? So, yeah. In terms of what Korok lost, he lost Flame Strike and he lost Whirlwind. So he got Earthen Fist and he got Blast Wave. He kept Demolish, which is the sort of Pyre Song ability, and he kept Lightning Speed, which I'm glad that we still have that aggro Anthem ability that lets you just sort of push damage off Forge.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Sunder. Sunder got Frost Blast. So Frost Blast reads deal 2 damage to each creature, or each enemy creature rather. At cycle 2, at cycle 3 it's 4 damage, and at cycle 4 it's 6 damage. So I think this is a little bit of a lackluster ability. However, it's very, very potent if you have an Elementalist Ritual in your deck.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is non-combat damage, and if you can amplify it with something like an Elementalist Ritual at the right time, especially if you can do both the like modes where it increases damage and does the sort of like all damage to non-elementals, you can use this in conjunction with Frost Blast to completely wipe out your opponent's side of the board.
Yep.
Is that a little bit Magical Christmas Land? Sometimes. It's good at taking out the lesser minions like the Gizmos and Wisps. But it's not really like my favorite ability of Sunder, so I think it's okay. I don't have a lot to say about it. It doesn't scale that well. 6 damage at cycle 4 just isn't enough, I feel like, to have I mean, I guess it's 30 damage if you hit everything, but it's not like full damage, right? You're not going to take everything out that way, and often you'll find in combat having 1 health is just as bad as having 10 health, right? Or whatever. Like, if you can't kill it, your creature's still going to trade. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say for me, the sweet spot here is the level 3 Frost Blast. Level 2, it's just a lot of times doesn't kill enough. It's one of those things where it kind of cleans up or kills the minions, like you said. At level 3, especially being like basically a level 1 Firestorm just to your side of the board, it like can really screw up combat math. I've actually, like you mentioned, the Elementalist Ritual, I've had a lot of people pair those two together and actually like get it off a lot. So it's like you mentioned, it's kind of Magical Christmas Land, but like a lot of the Nova Elementalist decks that had to Sunder with a Frost Blast would basically go Elementalist Ritual, wipe your board, Frost Blast, kill everything else. And it's just that alone, like, that was really difficult for the deck that I played in Worlds. Like, I was surprised I didn't have to face that specific combo during the tournament, because it probably would have destroyed me, because that was like my biggest weakness in that deck. So it's like I always look at it and I get a little scared just because I knew it was one of the biggest like threats against the style of deck I was playing leading up to Worlds and where I played test against it. That being said, I agree that overall the breakpoint of damage is not as much as I would like, but I feel like any more would probably be too strong because
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
a one-sided. If it was two-sided, like obviously I'll be like, all right, make it a little bit more, especially at cycle 3. But
Yeah.
being able to basically potentially just completely demolish your opponent's side of the board is just a lot for me. And it's like I like it, but
Yeah.
it's like something I don't necessarily seek out. And if it's at level 2, I'm like, ugh,
Yeah.
for me.
And when I'm sort of evaluating these abilities in a vacuum, if I don't have an Elements of Ritual in the deck, then how good is this, right?
Yeah,
So you have to. I mean, I guess I'd say Magical Christmas Land, but you do have the ability to choose when you pop it. It's
yeah,
just having the right board state on your opponent's side, and being able to. Sometimes you don't always have the choice of when you can pop your Forgeborn abilities. Sometimes the board
that's
state
true.
dictates you have to do it now. So it's interesting. There are going to be times where it's correct to just pop it right away. Other times you have to wait till you get an Elemental's Ritual. But it's kind of like all abilities, right? You wait till you have the right card to go with it, or you just emergency button, panic button, do it.
I will say that it's also really nice when you have stuff like Fury Shard back in your deck or Iceland's Mangus, and it's basically like you can kind of do a lot of the damage and then finish off with those kind of
Exactly.
cards.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a Frost Blast with a Vidicarus, and they basically Frost Blasted and then Vided the whole board away.
Yeah, that,
So
that
it's
works
like
too. Yeah, it's one of those
there's a
cards.
couple.
It's an ability that you need to have something else to go with it. It
I
sounds like.
agree,
Yeah.
100%.
Why don't we talk about Gale Surge?
Yeah, so Gale Surge might be my favorite Sunder ability. So at level 2, give your creatures +2 attack. This turn they gain mobility 1. At level 3, Gale Surge has give your creatures +3 attack. This turn they get mobility 2. And at level 4, Gale Surge has give your creatures +4. This turn they get mobility 3. I have lost so many times to Gale Surge. It is an incredible ability in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Because that evasiveness and the buff can just completely wreck your plans. Because it's like if you're already on the back foot, because a lot of times these Tempest decks are playing pretty aggressive, and then they come in and say like, all right, I could just move my whole board around, especially when they could do it off Forge. Like I know like I've died to a lot of Rumble Sparks that people are like, all right, I'm giving it mobility too. Like you can't block it now, and now take to like 24 or 26 or whatever it's at. And it's like just like it's one of those abilities that could push so much damage, but also could be used defensively if you need to. If you just need to block the board and move stuff around,
Yeah.
it's got so much flexibility, but it requires you to have obviously a board state. So not every deck is going to be perfect with Gale Surge, in my opinion. But it's one of those things where if you could have a board presence and then get to cycles 3 or 4, I feel like it could basically finish the game. Like it's finished me, like I said, multiple times. So level 2 is good. It could kind of help you push and get to cycle 3 and be ahead, but levels 3 and 4 could potentially just win you the game.
Yeah.
When you pop it.
Yeah, I feel like the cycle 3 and 4 are sort of the game ending versions of it because of how far you can move your creatures and completely rearrange your board. You can set up to push damage. You can set up to create more favorable trades. It doesn't work that great if you have a lot of creatures that have activated abilities because you can't mobility and use the activated ability in the same turn. But it's kind of like Korok's Lightning Speed, where you just giving your whole board attack all at once can just end games out of nowhere. So I like it. I think it's a great ability, especially for aggressive decks. I don't think it's. I'm not sure how good it is on a defensive deck, and I don't know that you're always going to be running Sunder as your Forge one if you're more of a control deck. But I don't have a lot of Sunders with this ability in decks that are aggressive enough to really take advantage of it. But I've seen it put to good use, and it can do. You really have to pay attention to where your open lanes are, and how far your opponent's creatures can move when you're facing it down. The sad thing is that Sunder lost Gathering Storm, which was probably one of her most powerful alpha abilities, and she also lost Ice Armor, which I think was her weakest ability. I think most of me agrees where just give a creature some armor and give yourself some armor for a turn is very hard to optimize. So I like Gale Surge is a really good replacement, but I don't think Frost Blast really replaced Gathering Storm in any shape or form. It's just not even close.
I feel like they just could not have Gathering Storm in the same set with Nova Elementalist. It just would have been too much.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially with like before they had the errata for transform as
Yeah.
well. Being able to potentially transform, play spells, gathering storm, that would have been too insane.
Yeah, that would be nuts. Uh, so yeah, why don't we talk about? Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about Nova. So we have Nova's first ability and probably the most contentious ability, which is simply called Bounty. It says cycle 2, you gain 2 life for each creature you have in play. At cycle 3, it's 3 life per creature, and at cycle 4 is 4 life per creature. And I said it's contentious because it is the first ability that does not have Nova's. It's not Nova's Bounty, it's just Bounty, which is a big flavor fail, in my opinion.
Me too, I agree.
That said, it can be a very strong ability, especially when you pair it with things like Swamp Moss Lurker or Arborist, where you can gain a big chunk of life to make either the Swamp Moss free or hit that threshold for Arborist to get it back your life back over 50. I think Bounty is a very strong card. Forgeborn ability. That said, it does not affect the board. All it does is buff your life. So unless you have ways to sort of like kindred creatures or like I said, Arborist or things like that can benefit from the life gain, it's not necessarily the ability you always want to see because it just like I said, it doesn't affect the board. It just unless you have other ways to sort of synergize with it. But what are your thoughts on Bounty?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of those things where the first time I saw Bounty, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is a ton of life gain. But it can be pretty conditional. Like, I know I played it in one of the set 3 sealed events when like I had a Bounty ability, and I found that a lot of times I'd really only have 2 or 3 creatures on the board when I would have the opportunity to actually activate. So it's like, okay, like I could activate and get 4 life, or I could activate and get 6 life. But at the same time, it's like I could be doing a lot stronger things with my Forgeborn ability.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have ways to trigger life gain, so if I had like something like, well, I guess Blowhive Siren's obviously not in set 3, but something where it's like it cares about life gain, so like the Kindreds,
Mm-hmm.
the Carnivorous Taros, like that's where I want to see Bounty. But at the same time, it's like there are going to be times where it's just going to be a blank, and there's going to be times where like you save it because you want to play your other creature, and then they wipe your board or something with the Firestar. You're like, oh no, now my Bounty is kind of worthless. So it's like trying to get the most value out of Bounty can be tough because it's like you're always like, oh, I could get one more creature, and then you wait more and more and more, and it's just really hard to time well. And at some point, you're just going to have to take the sacrifice of saying, all right, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to take the life, and at least know I'm going to get some. So
Yeah.
it's okay. It's one of those things where I think the fact that it doesn't say Nova's Bounty may be why it kind of deflates for me.
Yeah, that was, and I think they've also some of the new abilities in set 3 don't have Novas ahead of it, so that's
Yeah.
I understand their. I mean, I think that's just I know it was I've talked to Shadow. I know it was an accident that they left Novas at the front of the abilities, but I really feel like they should have leaned into it because I thought it was so cool. But it does kind of limit what you can name the abilities. So
That's true.
But yeah, why don't we talk about her other new ability, which is Nova's Judgment? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So at level 2, Nova's Judgment is give one of your creatures -4 health, give its opposing creature plus -4 health. Or sorry, I said minus, so it's +4 health for your creature, -4 for your opposing creature.
Yeah.
At level 3, give one of your creatures +7 health and give your opposing creature -7 health. Then finally, at level 4, Nova's Judgment is give one of your creatures +10 health and give its opposing creature -10 health. So this is like a kind of like a Toxic Spores, but you have to really care about your creature being opposing. I've actually found that Nova's Judgment can be strong in the right situations, but sometimes you're just like, I guess I'm just giving one of my creatures 4 health. So it's like, it's nice when you could remove. It's one of those things where you can drop a creature to block and then favorably block and keep your creature while killing theirs, and I feel like that's where it can kind of be strong. Like if you're playing against a Dark Heart Sorcerer, it's like a good way to potentially like finish off the Dark Heart or have a way to actually kill it with one of your smaller creatures that can't deal 8 damage off the bat. So it's like, it's very conditional, it's very lane placement important. It's very important for where you place your lanes, and it's like you're not always going to be able to remove the creature you want, but there are situations where it'll be nice and be removable in addition. So it's like you can only guarantee that you're going to get the top part of the ability where you're just going to buff your creature's health, but when you get the removal, it feels really nice. So having the ability to be a 2-for-1 is cool, but it always has to be your opposing. So like technically, when I say 2-for-1, it's just more of you keep your creature instead of losing it like you would have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so it has a couple of different applications. it can finish off a creature and just give a buff to one of your creatures. So it's basically just toxic spores that forces you to put a creature in a specific lane. Uh, it's at most like I feel like it's at most like a 1-for-1 because of the fact that it has to be opposing creatures.
Mhm.
Because if you think about how that works out, you play your creature in a lane, you use the -4 health to finish off the creature, and your creature gets +4 health, but it wasn't going to die anyway because there's nothing opposing it anyway. So,
Yeah.
you don't really can ever really get a 2-for-1 out of this. So it's okay. It's again the break points at the numbers. I feel like the level 2 is not the best. 3 and 4 are probably enough to make a difference, especially if you have creatures where you want to really buff their health, like a Thundersoar. That's where it can really shine because you're increasing the amount of damage you're going to push through with the breakthrough, and you're making it more survivable. But it's an okay ability. I don't know if I like. So I feel like this kind of replaced the the minion strike one, which was Nova's Wrath, I think. Is that it?
Yeah.
So I think I kind of like that one a little bit better because Nova's so sort of in tune with a minion strategy, and being able to strike with an Oak Father and clear the way was very, very strong, and this can't quite do as much as something that ability could. I guess Bounty replaced the Nova's Touch that lets you like turn something into a wisp. Again, like that was more of a ability that actually affected the board. So I feel like maybe they're trying to like give each Forgeborn some ability that doesn't directly affect the board. And so Bounty's kind of one of those, and Crux has several abilities that don't necessarily affect the board that much, and I get it, but I feel like Nova's alpha abilities were the best. I think what she lost wasn't very well replaced by what she gained in this set. So
Yeah, and I do feel like out of all the abilities that are left, Nova's Judgment's probably the one I want the least.
yeah, I think I'd rather have Nova's Judgment over Bounty if my deck doesn't have any life gain synergies.
Yes, you're right.
So it kind of depends, but I don't really want either.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
but I like that they kept Nova's Might and that they kept the Dominion so that you can either get your minions or get your whole team buffed up. So I like that they kept those two. I think those are probably some of her strongest abilities. So
Agreed.
at least they kept those. So let's just talk. We got one left to talk about, which is Oros. And Oros gained Spell Surge. So Spell Surge at level 2 reads: give a creature +2 attack and an additional +2 attack for each spell you've played this turn. At cycle 3, it's 4 attack +4 for each spell, and then at cycle 4, it's 7 attack +7 for each spell. So this ability really leans into Oros's sort of spell nature. So Oros is in Whitefang became kind of a Sunder analog, where Sunder's kind of like all about spells, and Oros is more about spells because you still have Darkforge Drain, which is also an ability that cares about spells. All that said, I don't think Spell Surge is that great. It's kind of one of those abilities that it's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, and you have to here's the things I have to line up. One, you have to play a bunch of spells in a turn to really get the maximum benefit of it. Two, you have to be able to activate it at a time where you're gonna usually off Forge, where you can push damage, and those two aspects sort of turn me off to it. Like, I'd almost rather it just give a creature +4 attack, +8 attack, or +14 attack, and just be done with it, and not have this whole well, maybe I can play 2 spells and get a little extra bonus. Because the fact that you have to play a spell to get even sort of the baseline benefit out of this, it makes me feel this is kind of like a weak ability. I've never been super impressed with this. I like that it leans into sort of his spell slinging abilities, but it's not something I really care for, especially since it doesn't increase its health. It just affects the attack. So, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree, because it's like if you kind of line this up with something like Shapeshift, which was +3/+3, give all creature types, you need to be playing 2 spells each turn to really line up with the Shapeshift stats. So it's like, hey, I could get 6 stats right off the bat, and here I have to play 2 spells to get 6 stats.
Yeah.
That alone makes it tough. I do appreciate that it's like pushing you to play more spells when you're playing Darkforge Drain, So I definitely have seen the decks where it's like Spell Surge into Dark Forge Drain, and then if you could kind of line both up, it's really nice. But it's like you have to be playing that build to really want to get the benefit here, and still you're likely only getting maybe 4 to 6 attack in your best case, because you also want to be playing like big creatures when you're playing something like Oros. So,
yeah. I feel like it kind of pigeonholes you, right? Like it forces you to like make suboptimal plays to try and get the maximum benefit out of it. And if you're making suboptimal plays, then like your Forgeborn ability is not gonna like make up that difference, right? So,
agree.
I've not been impressed with Spell Surge, but it is what it is.
One of those abilities where if my opponent's playing Oros and they have a Spell Surge, like I'm usually a little relieved, where I'm like, okay, I don't really have to worry about this.
Yeah, I mean, you still have to worry about it if they have open lane creatures or breakthrough creatures. Like you have to be aware of how much attack it can add, but it's not one that I'm like super scared of. But I have yet to be proven wrong on that, so we'll see.
Yeah, watch someone's gonna be like, "You're both fools. Look at my deck."
Like Flamejet, right. Warbringer Ritual, like Disintegrate, Spell Surge. It's like, okay, yay! That one time out of like 20 games, you pulled it off.
Yep, exactly.
So, and then let's talk about Oros's last new ability, which is Spirit Bond. So
Spirit Bond at level 2, you give a creature plus 4 health, and you give a creature adjacent to it plus 4 health. At level 3, it's give a creature plus 7 health and give a creature adjacent to it plus 7 health. And finally, at level 4, Spirit Bond is give a creature plus 10 health and give a creature adjacent to it plus 10 health. So at the end of the day, you're potentially getting a lot of stats, but the problem is it really has to be a lot about placement. Like a lot of times, I don't necessarily want to be playing creatures next to each other in Oros. Like it's just one of those things. I like to spread the board out, especially if my opponent could have something like Mobility, Ice Storm. Like, granted, the extra stats could help you potentially get through something like an Ice Storm, but it's just maybe you could use it with like maybe an Oxidon Ranger, because you're playing your Oxidon Ranger, the creature next to it potentially gets the buff and it stays alive, so it doesn't die when it's alone. Like, I wish it said adjacent creatures, not just an adjacent creature. But I guess it's one of those things where it's really not going to be pushing a lot for me on the board. I look at it and I'm just like, all right, I guess I could kind of hopefully have something live through combat, and it's more of like a defensive ability in my opinion. But what are your thoughts?
So I have mixed feelings about this ability. I agree. I wish it hit multiple creatures and maybe the stats were tweaked a little bit. Like maybe it isn't as strong, but it hits multiple creatures. So it's more like formation, or like, give a creature plus 4 and give its adjacent creatures plus 3 or something like that. And, something like sort of a formation analog. Health is almost always stronger than attack, in the terms that like if you can keep a creature on the board for another turn, that makes a big impact on the game, especially with your action equity. That said, Spirit Bond kind of replaced Growth Aura, and I think Growth Aura is just stronger because it hits your whole board. 100%. Even if and you get to gain life out of it, so you can do some life gain synergy stuff. It doesn't scale. Growth Aura doesn't scale as well, but it's much stronger in terms of how it will affect the board, and the fact that you don't have to worry about positioning. You don't have to. You're gonna get. The problem with Spirit Bond is you get into situations where like, even if you want to have creatures next to each other, your opponent can take one out, and like suddenly you have sort of a split lane situation where now you just can't, even if you wanted to. Or you have to like pop it immediately after playing the creature and hope that it doesn't get taken out with a Dreadbolt or something. So I don't know. It's okay. It's just it doesn't line up. It's okay on paper, but I just don't feel like it plays as well as it looks. So
yeah, I agree with you. Although I guess between like I'd prefer Spirit Bond over the other ability.
Barkskin.
You're getting exactly.
Arm, yeah. So I guess it's kind of like arm. It's better than Barkskin for sure, which is Barkskin was you give armor to 2 creatures for a turn. Yeah. This is just straight up health and it keeps it, right? So that's nice. I like that. If you consider this being the replacement, so maybe that's what they're going for.
Yes.
What did they keep? He kept Dark Forge Drain and Shapeshift, so he lost Barkskin and Growth Aura.
That sounds right.
And I think some of those abilities are coming back in set 3, so I think they're doing a thing where they're cycling some abilities and sort of mixing and matching as the sets go on. So I think that's nice to see. that some of the abilities that they took out from set 1 going to set 2 may come back in set 3. Like I like that design philosophy that
Yeah,
they're willing to put abilities back in based on what the set's trying to do.
I
So
agree.
I feel like Oros is a little bit weakened. I think both Utera Forgeborns were a little bit weaker than their alpha counterparts.
I
Um,
agree 100%.
but yeah, I think it's okay. So that's our Oros abilities. Why don't we talk about? Let's move into our last faction, which is Necrium. So let's talk about Cersei. So first ability for Cersei we've got is Shadowcast. So Shadowcast reads at cycle 2, give a creature +3 attack this turn, it gains stealth. Cycle 3, it's +5 attack, also gains stealth for the turn, and at cycle 4, it is 8 attack, and it gives stealth for the turn. It's fine. It's a good ability if you want to punch through damage. It's a little tricky in that oftentimes, you want to be on Forge to push through damage to make sure they don't have a blocker, but you also want to be off Forge because you don't want them to nuke your creature you just gave the buff to. So it's a little hard to use, and sometimes you have to just having to use it as a way to like just buff a creature's attack enough to kill something. But what are your thoughts on Shadowcast? I don't have a lot to say about this ability.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's one of those abilities that I kind of try to avoid because at the end of the day, a lot of times it ends up being just a buff of +3, +5, and +8. I
Mm-hmm.
find, like you said, a lot of times if I shadow cast something, my opponent will kill it. That's like their removal target because I'm usually doing it on a threat anyway. Like so, every once in a while you'll play a shadow cast, you'll give something stealth, and you'll actually be able to push damage with it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times I find you do the shadow cast, if you're doing it on Forge, your opponent has the ability to respond, and they tend to have something every time you do it, and it's just like they feel punished. So it's an ability that's there. It's one of those things where I don't seek it out, but if I have it, I guess I'll try to use it. But
Yeah,
it's not my favorite.
it's okay. Um, yeah, let's talk about her other abilities. So yeah, next ability is Sorrow. So why don't you go over Sorrow?
Yeah, so Sorrow at level 2 is give all non-Necrom creatures -2, -2. At level 3, you give all non-Necrom creatures -3, -3. And at level 4, you give all non-Necrom creatures -5, -5. So when I first saw this ability, I was really impressed, and then I realized it's all non-Necrom, so your opponent's creatures also stay alive. And also, technically, if you're playing another faction and your other creatures are on the board from your Terra faction, for example, you're also potentially killing your own creatures. So I find that this is a really, really hard ability to play, but if you have it and it lines up well, it could be pretty nice. But it gives too much opportunity to hurt yourself, and you almost have to play around the sorrow for yourself. So it's like, all right, I guess I have to play all my Necrom creatures this cycle because I really want to make sure I get the most out of my sorrow. So I feel like Cersei was so powerful during set 1 that like I think anything that you throw out is
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna feel less powerful. But it's just I honestly I don't think I've ever actually used sorrow because it's just like it's actually going to hurt me more. I'd rather just not use it and just kind of let it happen.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
in the same boat. Sorrow makes me sad.
yeah. Well, I
I
think
feel
it's
like
supposed to do.
the biggest problem is that a lot of people are playing Necrium. It hurts your other faction, so you have to be like heavy on your Necrium plays. So I mean, it kind of lives up flavorfully with what Cersei's trying to do. But I think it suffers kind of from the same thing that Frostblast on Sunder suffers from, is that the amounts that you're giving are not always enough to take out a creature. It's not always enough to save your creature with the attack debuff. Um, and it asks for a very specific board state that's really hard to set up
Yeah,
profitably. So, the thing about Cersei is she lost Death Touch and she lost Life Drain in this set. And she didn't really get a good replacement. Like, I don't feel like Sorrow's a good replacement, and that kind of leaves her with not very many abilities that can directly affect the board.
yeah,
She still has Soul Siphon to destroy one of your creatures to give something, plus X plus X, and she kept Army Commander, which is still her best ability. So, that's nice, but she lost some of her control tools, and I just don't feel like she got any of those replaced. So she definitely got weakened in this set. Uh, but at the same time, one could argue that she's a little bit too powerful in set 1. So
yeah.
maybe
I
she
think she
needed it.
needed a downgrade. I agree. Like she definitely needed to be downgraded because I literally will seek out Necrom decks because of the right Cersei orientation to have like the Death Touch Life Chain that Army Commander. I
Yeah.
will say I could not believe when they spoiled set 2 that Army Commander was still in the set. I was like, this when I saw Forgeborn abilities were leaving, I was like, Army Commander has to be out. This is too good of an ability. And then I
Yeah.
saw it on the card, and I'm just like, really? But that being said, I will say that I actually avoid a lot of my set 2 Necrom decks, or at least avoid using Cersei's if I have them, because I feel like the downgraded abilities just lose so much value compared to set 1 that it's just like, if I'm going to play competitively, I either run a set 1 Cersei or I run my other Forgeborn if I'm going to be running Necrom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my feeling too, is that Shadowcast and Sorrow, you're going to get one of them, and neither of them are very good in the, at least in the current meta. Maybe that'll change when set 3 comes out. Sorrow, there's just too much Necreum running around that it's hard to maximize, and Shadowcast is just too easy to respond to.
Yep.
And generally, Cersei is a more of a control Forgeborn, and Shadowcast is more of a aggro ability. So it's kind of hard to mesh those two things together. So oftentimes you'll find that the Battle for, like you said, Battle for Whitefang Pass Cersei, you're probably gonna not be playing her. I think our best use case is when I get Army Commander and I'm playing Steel Rosetta with Inspire at that level. So that's my go to if I want to get lucky, is get the right Army Commander at the right Inspire level for my set 2 Cersei. But why don't we talk about Nyx? Nyx got a new ability. Why don't we talk about Dark Ritual? So Dark Ritual is kind of the inverse of Cersei's Soul Siphon. It says destroy one of your creatures to give a creature -5/-5. At cycle 3, it's -7/-7. And at cycle 4, it's -10/-10. So you're blowing up one of your creatures to kill and or debuff one of your opponent's creatures. It's okay. It's nice that Nyx now has a ability that can actually affect your opponent's side of the board, right? All of her set 1 abilities are just either playing minions or playing more creatures from your hand or discard. Mm-hmm. So this is one way to sort of affect your opponent's side of the board. That said, you're also hurting your own board position, so unless you have self-destruction synergies, Dark Ritual is not necessarily going to put you in a good position. Yeah. The nice thing is that you have a lot of abilities that in Necreon to generate minions, so it's really easy to just chuck a minion at something. One thing I disappointed is that Necrotic didn't make it back into set 2, which means you don't have those creatures to destroy and then you get a minion back out of it at least. So that's a bit of a disappointment, and that sort of reduces the strength of this ability a little bit. Yeah. But it's fine.
You do still technically have Zimus and Indomitable Fiend, but it's still, that's not.
That's true, yeah.
I still find it's just, I wish I had more stuff like Necrotic.
Yeah. And you also lost Summoner. A lot of the ways that Necreum had to get creature advantage on the board didn't make it into set 2. So it's a little bit harder to bank on one of these abilities. But sometimes you just gotta use what you got.
I do think this might have been one of those abilities that they were looking forward to set 3, knowing that there's a lot more destruction synergy. And they probably knew what they were doing with design and were like, okay, we'll put this here, and then people will find more use for it
later. Yeah.
Set 3 decks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Broodfang's still in the set, so and yeah. One of the Hydras, Spite Hydra's still in the set, so you might be able to find good ways to use this to line up those cards really well. But again, you're trading board position for board position, so you're kind of netting equal, so you need sort of a self-destruction synergy to make this work. But it's okay. I've not been super impressed with it, but I'm also not super disappointed with it. You usually can find a time to use it that you'll be able to get an advantage out of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's talk about our last ability, which is pretty cool. Why don't you talk about Endless Death?
Yeah, so Endless Death at level 2, your creatures get, when this is destroyed, you may play a mindless zombie minion this turn. At level 3, Endless Death says, your creatures get, when this is destroyed, you may play a zombie brute minion this turn. And finally, at level 4, it says, when your creatures are destroyed, or your creatures get when this creature is destroyed, you may play an Oakfather minion this turn. So this is an ability that's pretty interesting. The first thing that when I saw this card, I was like, wait, I can make Oakfathers in Necro? Like what?
Yeah.
And like I thought this was going to be a big story thing, but so far we haven't seen anything yet. But um, I feel like in general, I first misunderstood this ability because I thought it was for the rest of the turn, but it's not. It's just specifically the creatures on the board. So it's like you can't just like endless death and then keep killing mindless zombie minions and doing it over and over and over again and get
Right.
like shambling triggers and things like that. But you could get a lot of value by like basically favorably blocking for things, knowing that you're gonna get bodies back. Or you could use like self-destruction synergy stuff where you destroy one of your creatures and then you get a brute back in its place. So I've found that like endless death, I've gotten some use out of it. I've played it in a Glorf Glob deck where I was able to like endless death, then play the Glorf Glob, kill the creature, and then get the brute at level 3, and it's like that's pretty cool. I got some value out of it, but at the same time, I feel like it's more of a it's conditional on how well it's going to benefit you, because sometimes you'll activate it, nothing will die, and then you're like, okay, like
Yeah.
it was at least it was a protection shield, but it didn't really benefit me much at the moment. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Endless Death is a bit of a miss for me. I get so as far as the Oakfather thing goes at Cycle 4, I feel like they just need something that was better than just getting a
Yeah,
zombie brute, and it would have been too cumbersome to be like, get a zombie brute and give it +4/+4 or something, right? So they just said, just Oakfather, it fits.
yeah,
And, it's potent, but Oakfathers at Cycle 4 are not that, scary. Um, I think the biggest problem with this ability is that it's very hard to maximize, and it just doesn't compare to some of her alpha abilities that she lost, which were Army of the Damned and Raising Dead, which just gave you the minion. It just gives you the
yeah.
minions, right? One thing I misread about this is that you get to play the minion. Like the first time I saw this, I misread that you don't have to play the minion in the same lane that the creature died, which
Yeah.
is important to be aware of. Again, the best application for this is usually going to be if you have self-destruction synergies where you can just get the body back out. But oftentimes it feels like it's just an extra step for what is effectively Army Commander or Army of the Damned. And, you know, I, it's I just not been the floor is too low compared, and the ceiling isn't high enough for me with this card. Um,
I was say the funny thing you mentioned, it's like it's to play a mindless zombie minion this turn, not a lane. I actually didn't have that realization until I was just reading it right now. And when I stumbled over my words, I was like, wait a second, I could have played this anywhere. Because like I've only really used this ability like 2 or 3 times, and I always just did it right away in that lane. So I do feel like it makes it a little bit stronger there. But like
yeah,
it's funny because like I literally just had that light bulb go off in my head like right now, like, oh wait, I could have put this anywhere.
yeah. It's a very easy thing to overlook when you first read the ability, and oftentimes it's like, well, the plane's free, I'll just put it here, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of like shortcut it. That it's just gonna summon where it died, but it's nice that you do have the flexibility of putting it anywhere. But again, when you compare this to just straight up Army of the Damned, at level 2 you get 2 mindless zombies. Like, how often with endless deaths are you going to get more than 2 mindless zombies? Like, you're lucky to get 1. And then same thing at level 3 Army of the Damned, you get 2 brutes. Like, when are you going to get, like, if you get 3 brutes out of endless death, that's pretty epic. But that's like a high ceiling compared to like a really low floor where you just don't get anything out of it because of when you're forced to activate it and what the board state is. Your best chance to do it is like where you're going to be losing a bunch of creatures off Forge, and you get to do it when you know they're going to die in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's an ability that can just really be a blank. So I've not been super impressed with it. I think it reads better than it actually plays,
Yeah.
but there are always going to be applications to it. So
I feel like they almost had to tone back Army of the Damned though because of like the Aloy and minion strategy stuff that's going on with Mad Winter and Synthetis Laboratory. Because
maybe.
if you could have had like I think it's the same reason why they got rid of Drix, and like we're seeing a couple cards come back that were just like problems with some of these major card combos in set
Mm-hmm.
2 and set 3. So it's like I like looking at it, it's just like, oh, I guess if I could have potentially played 2 mindless zombies and replaced one over itself in a Synthetis Laboratory and gotten potentially multiple gizmos, like that could have been a pretty wild turn that they probably were trying to prevent, and that might be why. And the same thing with actually with Raising Dead, buffing all of your minions would probably be really crazy in that deck as well. So it might have just been like they saw it and they're like, okay, we kind of want to keep these abilities, but we don't want to go too crazy with Bad Winter and Synthetis Laboratory.
Yeah, I don't know. I know we're into previous season with set 3, and I know they brought Army of the Damned back, so
Yeah.
we'll have to see.
Yeah.
I think, you know, her, or actually I believe Nyx is non-binary. Their abilities in set 1 were very minion focused. Like, there was a lot of weight towards minions, and this is really the only minion ability that they have now. So I feel like they've kind of lost their identity a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, it's just kind of all over the place now. So, you know, the fact they lost Raising Dead and they lost Army of the Damned is sad for set 2, but some of the abilities are okay. I mean, Soul Rip, I've gotten a lot. So Soul Rip and Dark Ritual came, or not Dark Ritual, Dark Summoning came back. And I've actually come to respect those abilities a bit more the more I played with them. Like, I feel like people sort of don't give those abilities as much credit as they deserve. They can be much more powerful than you think, especially if you get your Dark Summoning at cycle 2, where you just get a straight up brute, because brutes are pretty big. You know, I feel like it falls behind, but I've found a lot of value in being able to like time when you bring a creature back from your discard, or being able to time when you play an extra creature in a turn. I think that they're much more powerful than people give them credit for. So
I agree with you. No, I was gonna say I will agree though, or I will state that like a lot of times I don't really play my Necrium Forgeborn out of my set 2 decks. It's just one of those things where a lot of times the decks that I pair them with, like it's a lot of time, it might be a Korok or something like that, and it's just in set 2 stuff like Korok is just a lot stronger. And it's just we lost from both Nyx and Cersei some really strong abilities, and it could just be one of those things where we're so spoiled in set 1 that set 2 we get something like Endless Death, or we get something like this
like Sorrow.
ability. Yeah. Sorrow, there we go. Yeah, and it's just like we get a couple things where it's just like, and it's funny because I don't really know the ability names super well because I don't really play with them very much, and it's just like one of those things where it's just I look at the card and I'm just like, man, I wish this was a set 1 Necrum Forgeborn instead, and then this deck would be amazing.
Yeah.
Which again, I think we're spoiled a little bit on that aspect, but like I think these abilities are really fun in like, hey, we're gonna play a fun game of SolForge, but once you start getting to more of that competitive tier, it's just you're not getting enough out of these abilities to really make them worth picking your Forgeborn over something like having an Endless Death.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of decks we see in the meta will mix the two, and you usually probably are often seeing the alpha Forgeborn rather than the set 2 Forgeborn when you get those mixes. But
I agree.
Though I think like Tempe's, I think Tempe's came ahead, but and I think Loyan probably came ahead, but I think Utera and Necrium kind of fell behind in terms of their previous iterations. So
I feel like they had to though.
Yeah, really they kind of did. So yeah, why don't we wrap it up? So what was your favorite Forgeborn ability out of set 2?
I would have to say Gale Surge is probably my favorite. It's just the amount of damage you could push, and it's just such a game-ending ability. It's just I've lost to it enough times where I'm like, okay, I respect this, and I want my card to have it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think for me, Earthen Fist is probably has a special place in my heart right now, especially because I have a deck that I really like that utilizes it with Cacklebones, and it's just such a satisfying feeling when you get to kill 2 things with Cacklebones out of nowhere. And Cacklebone survives and it's still on the board as a threat that's got mobility. It's just with now it has power instead of just one power. It's got actual like a threatening amount of power. So I've been a big fan of Earthen Fists, and I do have a little bit of a soft spot for Neotech Disruptor now, because of my Mad Winter deck that I love to play. Like I've seen it go off so hard that it's kind of like it can surpass what Gathering Storm can do, even though like Gathering Storm is sort of you usually will use it to just go straight to the opponent's face with that. You can't do that with Nanotech, but you can really just completely destroy a board with Nanotech in the right situation. So I think those are on my top of my list here.
I agree.
But
kind of make me want to change a little bit.
Yeah, give it a try. Do you have another one that you're thinking of?
No, I'm saying you make me want to kind of try those abilities more. Is what
Gotcha.
Like, you're convincing me to kind of be like, oh, maybe Nanotech Disruptor is better.
Yeah, give it a whirl. I think you'll be.
Yeah, I will have to.
If you have the right deck for it. Again, like what our discussion was earlier, right? You have to have the right deck for it. You need to have those replacement synergies and the minion fodder to do it. But
I
when
just
you
have
do,
such a
it's
soft
just
spot for a Pokemancer. And it's
yeah,
just like
yeah,
a Pokemancer and ability. Like, oh, I love it.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, so that's our sort of I want to call it a mini episode, but we've been going for for a little while. But this is just sort of wraps up our review of Battle for Whitefang Pass. Thank you again, Sam, for joining me today. And to the listeners, what are your thoughts on the new Forgeborn abilities? What are you excited about, or have you been having a lot of luck with? Which ones do you miss the most? And just leave some comments below. Sam, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on both Twitch and YouTube at Natus Gaming. So, yeah, come find me and look at my
Yeah,
content.
definitely check out his content. I've been enjoying his most recent box opening videos. Those are always fun to watch people live vicariously through watching others opening boxes and getting cool stuff. So I definitely recommend watching his content and watching his a lot of he also do a lot of sort of Twitch stream recordings
Yes.
and doing gameplay with tournaments. So that's also very fun to watch and sort of see how the game is played. So by the world
Oh,
champ.
thank you.
All right, guys. So that's the end of our episode. So we will bid you guys adieu. Have a good one.
See you later.
Bye.